The story of water from the rock is one of the most profound demonstrations of God's provision and holiness in the Bible. It is recounted in two primary instances, Exodus 17, 1-7, and Numbers 20, 1-13. Both events occur during the Israelites' journey through the wilderness after their deliverance from Egypt, though they happen in different locations and under distinct circumstances. Together, these stories offer timeless lessons about faith, obedience, and God's unfailing care for His people. The first account, Exodus 17, 1-7. After their miraculous escape from Egypt, the Israelites began their long journey to the Promised Land. They traveled through harsh wilderness terrain, where food and water were scarce. In Exodus 17, the Israelites camped at a place called Rephidim, but there was no water for them to drink. This lack of water caused the people to panic and complain bitterly to Moses. The people's frustration grew into open hostility. They quarreled with Moses, demanding, "Give us water to drink." Their complaints soon turned into accusations, as they questioned why Moses had led them out of Egypt. "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Exodus 17:3. Their words reflected a deeper issue, a lack of faith in God's ability to provide for them. Moses, overwhelmed by their anger and threats, cried out to God, saying, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." In response, God gave Moses clear instructions. He was to take his staff, the same staff used to part the Red Sea, and go to the rock at Horeb. God promised to stand before him on the rock. Moses was to strike the rock, and water would flow out for the people to drink. Moses obeyed God's command. In the presence of the elders of Israel, he struck the rock, and water gushed out, providing for the needs of the people and their livestock. Moses named the place Massah, which means testing, and Meribah, which means quarreling, to commemorate the Israelites' complaints and their testing of the Lord by asking, "Is the Lord among us or not?" B. This first instance of water from the rock highlighted God's patience and provision. Despite the people's grumbling and lack of trust, God met their needs in a miraculous way. It also demonstrated Moses' role as an intermediary between God and the Israelites, as he interceded on their behalf, even in the face of their hostility. The second account, Numbers 21-13. The second instance of water from the rock occurred much later in the Israelites' journey, near the end of their 40 years in the wilderness. By this time, a new generation of Israelites had grown up, but the pattern of complaining and doubting God's provision persisted. In Numbers 20, the Israelites arrived at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Once again, there was no water, and the people gathered to complain against Moses and Aaron. They lamented their situation, saying, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here?" Numbers 23:4. Their words echoed the complaints of their parents' generation, revealing a continued lack of faith in God. Moses and Aaron went to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell face down before the Lord. God's glory appeared to them, and he gave specific instructions for addressing the people's needs. God told Moses to take the staff, gather the assembly, and speak to the rock before their eyes. By speaking to the rock, water would pour out, providing for the community and their livestock. However, in his frustration with the people's grumbling, Moses did not follow God's instructions precisely. Instead of speaking to the rock, Moses struck it twice with his staff. He also addressed the people in anger, saying, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" And Numbers 20:10. Although water still flowed abundantly from the rock, God was displeased with Moses and Aaron for their disobedience. God told Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Numbers 20:12. This judgment was a sobering consequence of their actions. Moses and Aaron, who had faithfully led the people for decades, were now barred from entering the Promised Land because they had failed to uphold God's holiness before the people. Moses named the place Meribah, quarreling, to mark the Israelites' continued rebellion and God's provision despite their lack of faith. While both stories involve God providing water from a rock, there are notable differences between the two accounts. The first event occurred at Rephidim near Mount Horeb, while the second took place at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. In the first instance, Moses was commanded to strike the rock. In the second, he was instructed to speak to the rock. In Exodus, Moses obeyed God's command fully. In Numbers, Moses disobeyed by striking the rock instead of speaking to it. The first account solidified Moses' role as a faithful leader and mediator. The second account resulted in a severe consequence for Moses and Aaron, as they were denied entry into the Promised Land. In both accounts, God demonstrated his unfailing care for his people. Even when they grumbled and doubted him, he provided for their needs in miraculous ways. This reminds us of God's patience and his willingness to meet our needs, even when our faith falters. Moses' actions in the second account underscore the importance of obeying God fully. Partial obedience or acting out of frustration can have significant consequences. God desires that his instructions be followed precisely, as this reflects trust in his wisdom and holiness. Both stories emphasize that God is holy and must be honored as such. In Numbers 20, Moses and Aaron's failure to demonstrate God's holiness cost them dearly. This serves as a reminder that our actions and attitudes should reflect reverence for God. The Israelites' repeated complaints and doubts reveal the human tendency to forget God's past faithfulness in the face of present challenges. It also shows how leaders, like Moses, are not immune to frustration and failure. Yet God's grace is evident even in these moments of weakness. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul reflects on these stories and identifies the rock as a symbol of Christ. In 1 Corinthians 10:4, Paul writes, "They drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." Just as the rock provided life-giving water to the Israelites, Christ offers living water to all who come to him in faith. The stories of water from the rock in Exodus 17 and Numbers 20 reveal God's character, his provision, and his desire for his people to trust him fully. They also highlight the responsibilities of spiritual leadership and the consequences of disobedience. For believers today, these accounts serve as a call to trust God in every circumstance, to honor his holiness, and to seek the living water that only Christ can provide. Through these stories, we are reminded that God's provision is always sufficient, and his grace is greater than our failures.